Marisol knew the city better than most. She'd grown up weaving between the bright shops, the hidden alleys, the flicker of neon signs that illuminated the worn asphalt. She even took some small pride in understanding its secret rhythms. The hum of midnight traffic, the murmur of late-night diners, and the echo of seagulls that occasionally flitted in from the nearby bay. But all this changed the night a meteor, as brilliant as a second sun, crashed into the heart of downtown. Overnight, everything she had relied on, her sense of order, her knowledge of the city's nooks and crannies, was turned inside out. She'd been leaving the university library when she first saw something streak across the moonlit sky. At first, she assumed it was a shooting star, a cosmic flourish for a typically humdrum Tuesday night. But it kept growing, blazing brighter, until everyone on the street was riveted by the fireball hurtling toward the skyline. A deafening rumble shook the ground beneath her feet, and for one surreal moment, the lights of the entire block flickered, as if the meteor's impact had disrupted the city's very power grid. Marisol was knocked off her feet. The breath punched out of her lungs. As she tumbled to the pavement, she scrambled upright to see a spectacle that would become the talk of the world. At the center of downtown lay a jagged crystalline meteorite, nearly 2 stories high, embedded in the street, like an otherworldly jewel forced into the city's bones. Deep purples and blues glimmered in the meteorite's core, reflecting in the shattered windows of the surrounding skyscrapers. Authorities rushed to cordon off the crash zone, red and blue lights swirling in confusion, while reporters, paramedics, and scientists flooded the site with cameras and measuring devices. But the real story began hours later, when the cosmic radiation from this fallen star started weaving magic into the people who lived nearby. Marisol didn't realize it immediately. She spent the first night at home trying to calm her younger brother, Matteo, whose entire concept of the city's safety had crumbled with the impact. Earthquakes had never terrified him, nor had the usual hurricanes or storms that rolled in every so often from the coast. But this was different. A chunk of cosmic material had literally crashed onto their doorstep. Marisol tried to comfort him as best she could. They stayed up watching live coverage. Within a day, rumors filled every channel. People were saying that some of those who visited the crash site felt a surge of new strength or weird bursts of energy. One rumor claimed that a city worker had accidentally summoned a flame from his fingertips while clearing the debris. Another story told of a paramedic who discovered she could manipulate water to douse flames from a ruptured gas line. Most of these anecdotes seemed so outlandish that Marisol dismissed them until it happened to her. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Marisol decided to venture close to the crash site out of pure curiosity. After weaving through barricades, she was able to get a glimpse of the meteorite's surface. Enigmatic, crystalline facets rose like broken glaciers from another dimension. The crater rim pulsed with an energy that made her hair stand on end. Scientists in hazard suits traipsed across the site, setting up instruments. Onlookers pressed as near as the city's recently erected fences would allow. One older woman shouted that the crystal was a message from guardian spirits. A man next to her insisted it should be destroyed for the safety of humanity. Cameras clicked, capturing the fused asphalt and twisted rebar around the crater. Drawn by an impulse she couldn't explain, Marisol grabbed onto the chain-link fence that separated the public from the meteorite. A tingle darted up her fingers like static shock, making her jolt backward. She steadied herself, heart pounding, and tried again. A wave of warmth traveled along her skin, as though she were brushing against a vibrant, humming current. Something invisible coursed through her arms, then sank into her chest, almost like a second heartbeat. Confused and sensing that some unseen boundary had been crossed, she hurried away from the site, not pausing to question what exactly had just happened. At first, Marisol thought her slight dizziness and trembling hands might be the effect of standing too close to radiation or toxins. Yet as soon as she got back to her apartment, she found her mother in a frenzy, trying to calm Matteo, who was shrieking that the living room floor had turned to ice. Confusion flashed across Marisol's face. She bent to inspect the floor. A thin layer of frost actually glistened along the tiles. As she stood up, panic roiling in her stomach, she noticed tiny crystals of frost forming around her fingertips. Alarmed, she clenched her fists, and the frost disappeared. Are you doing that?" her mother whispered. Marisol's response came in the form of an unsteady breath. Then, with a mixture of fascination and fear, she held out her hand again, focusing on the strange sensation in her veins. Flecks of ice began to condense in the air above her palm. Mateo's screech of fear turned into a gasp of awe. Marisol's mother pressed her back against the wall, her eyes wide with concern. No one knew what to do next. After a few stunned moments, they discovered that inhaling slowly allowed Marisol to reel back the power. Distraction or panic only made it flare up. Word spread quickly throughout the city. A handful of random people who'd ventured closest to the meteorite were manifesting powers tied to the 5 classical elements: earth, fire, water, air, and metal. Some described it as a bizarre twist on old legends, but it felt frighteningly real to anyone who woke up one morning, rubbed the sleep from their eyes, and, inadvertently, started scorching their bed sheets or flooding the bathtub with a swirl of conjured water. The city manager, outraged that the quarantined area hadn't been maintained strictly enough. Tall concrete barriers went up. The National Guard was called in, and scientists fanned out across the region collecting blood samples from any of the newly gifted who'd come forward. But some individuals admired their powers a little too much. Leon Rafferty, a young man who worked as a stage technician for an underground rave club, began organizing secret gatherings after hours. Flashy demonstrations of flame whips, swirling rocks, or gusts of wind replaced the usual dance floor pyrotechnics. The rumor went around, "We're the new generation of humans. We're going to shape the city as we please." The authorities, of course, clamped down in response, but that only nurtured a rebellious subculture among the newly empowered. Some believed it was their right to use these unchecked abilities however they wanted. Chaos soon threatened the city. Electrical systems overloaded whenever a particularly potent air manipulator lost control of the winds near power lines. Fires sparked in places they shouldn't. Bridges quaked beneath the friction of city dwellers trying to test just how far their earth-shaking abilities could go. Scientists set up labs around the meteorite, desperate to understand how the cosmic crystal restructured human DNA or invoked powers once thought purely mythical. Most of the newly endowed were trying to cope. Hospitals became overwhelmed with those who'd inadvertently injured themselves or others. Elementary schools shut down, not wanting young children near something that could transform them. Parents grew frantic, covering their kids' ears every time a siren blared. Meanwhile, Marisol struggled with the moral weight of her new powers. She'd always been a careful person, methodical, someone who had to plan her day with near-military precision to balance classes, part-time jobs, and family obligations. Now, she was forced to confront a force inside herself that didn't follow logic and scheduling. The powers came in waves, triggered by strong emotional responses or physical stress. Sometimes, if she laughed too hard, the room temperature would dip. If she got angry, she'd notice the drapes freezing to the windowsill. It frightened her. She didn't want that kind of control, or lack thereof, over her surrounding, and yet a tiny kernel of curiosity inside her relished the sense of raw potential. A couple of days after discovering her gift, Marisol was in her bedroom trying to keep calm as she studied. Finals were approaching, but focus was elusive. No matter how she tried, her eyes kept zeroing in on the geometry equations. It was like her mind skipped from the shapes on the page to the shapes of ice crystals forming at the edges of her desk. She shivered and exhaled slowly to force the powers back down. Suddenly, a phone alert flashed across her screen, announcing a violent confrontation downtown. Gifted individuals were in a standoff with law enforcement near the Meteor site. Some were demanding unrestricted access to the crystal, claiming it was their birthright to control it. The authorities refused to back down. Marisol knew she couldn't keep ignoring the crisis that was swallowing up the city. Every day, more and more people developed powers, and the city's infrastructure was buckling under the strain of unpredictability. If she let fear and confusion drive her, she'd be no better off than those unleashing the raw elements in the streets. Breathing in, she focused. Control over herself first, then decisions. She needed to see what was happening with her own eyes. Maybe even try to help. Leaving a note for her mother, who was working an evening shift, Marisol grabbed her jacket and headed downtown. Night had fallen by the time she arrived. She caught her breath at the chaos unfolding in a wide intersection usually packed with traffic. Now the asphalt was littered with barriers, abandoned cars, shards of glass, and the occasional spire of ice or spiked protrusion of rock. Police lines were drawn behind towering riot shields. A group of about a dozen gifted faced them, some sporting bright red bandanas, others with neon sorts of protective gear. One woman in the group, her hair braided and adorned with shards of what looked like meteorite crystal, was wielding a swirl of water around her arms, as if brandishing liquid guns. The tension was palpable. Leon Rafferty stepped forward. Everyone knew him from media coverage. He was rumoured to have a powerful fire gift. "We're not criminals," he shouted to the officers. "The city doesn't own the meteorite. It belongs to all of us." Flames danced around his hands like living animals ready to pounce. The crowd behind him roared approval. Officers murmured into radios nervously. Marisol gulped as she edged closer, slipping behind a row of onlookers who dared to gather. She recognized some people from her university among the watchers. Yvonne, a biology major who now seemed capable of bending metal into origami shapes. Darnell, a grad student in geology whose new powers let him cause small tremors. They looked simultaneously awed and terrified. None of them knew how to quell the tension, just as Marisol weighed whether she should speak. Though she had no idea how to mediate a standoff, someone unseen launched a gust of wind. It slammed into a police car, flipping it like a piece of cardboard. The officer's line wavered. Panicked, a few fired tear gas canisters, unleashing clouds of choking smoke into the night air. Within seconds, an industrial cacophony erupted. The hiss of gas, the crackle of flames, the roar of water conjured to flood the intersection. Marisol coughed and covered her face with her sleeve, eyes stinging. Gifted individuals scrambled, each using their power in a different misguided attempt to defend themselves or to strike out. A swirl of wind launched the tear gas canisters back at the police. The flames around Leon's hands surged into the sky, igniting overhead street lamps in a series of popping explosions. Broken glass rained. Marisol crouched low, trying to find a path out, but her heart clenched when she saw a small child trapped behind the line of skirmishers. The child, no older than 10, stared wide-eyed at the chaos, tears tracking through the dusty smears on his face. Invisible adrenaline propelled Marisol forward. She reached the child and shielded him from a stray flicker of flame. She glanced around, desperate for a way out of the madness. A cluster of scaffolding to her left led to an alleyway. Without hesitating, she took the child's hand and tugged him behind the battered rows of barricades, half crawling, half running. Above her, the swirl of mayhem continued, blasts of hot air, sirens, and the whoosh of water pounding the pavement. A beam of corrugated metal soared overhead, a telekinetic fling from who knew which side. Huddling behind a toppled dumpster, Marisol urged the child to remain still. He was trembling, too terrified to speak. Then, an unexpected wave of water roared down the alley. Apparently, someone had corralled the water from a broken hydrant to flush the area. Marisol's eyes widened. They would be swept away, pinned against the dumpster perhaps. The power, she realized with a jolt, was cryokinesis ice. She had a chance to do something. Placing one hand against the child's shoulder in reassurance, she stretched out her other hand. She imagined the sharp, crystalline geometry in her mind. A cold surge welled inside her, traveling down her arm and out through her fingertips. A thick, bulwark-like barrier of ice rose up from the ground. The water slammed against it, sending sprays into the air on either side, but the barrier, slick and shimmering, held its place. Marisol felt her muscles tremble from the effort of sustaining it. When the wave receded, she dropped her hand, panting. The ice wall melted rapidly into a puddle, leaving the alley floor damp but passable. The child stared up at her in wide-eyed awe. "Are you an angel?" he whispered. Marisol let out a shaky laugh. She felt anything but angelic, but she was thankful the child was safe. Before anyone else could see them, she hurried him down the street, away from the continuing violence. All the while, sirens blared from every direction as more emergency services swarmed downtown. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights scanning through thick clouds of tear gas and columns of steam. The swirling energies of so many gifted individuals clashed in chaotic arcs. Another chunk of the meteorite, severed from the main body at some point, lay half buried in a crater at the next intersection, bizarrely pulsing with the same faint luminescence. A wave of dizziness hit Marisol when she passed near it, reminding her of that first electric jolt she'd felt through the fence. She wondered if the meteorite crystals themselves were intensifying these powers, fueling the turmoil with cosmic pulses only partially understood. Sometime after midnight, local leaders and city officials managed to restore a semblance of order. With the help of specialized containment units, scientists who had designed portable dampeners that inhibited the unusual energies. High-frequency emitters, carried in armored vans, were activated to quell the raw bursts of elemental power. Those caught in the conflict found themselves suddenly weakened, their abilities fading to a spark. Confused and exhausted, the rebellious gifted were rounded up by police officers. Leon Rafferty, his eyes blazing with defiance, tried to summon one last fiery burst, but it fizzled as the dampeners rattled to life. Onlookers watched, half relieved, half frightened by the technology that seemed to choke out the new magic as though flipping a switch. Marisol retreated to her apartment, adrenaline still thrumming. She managed only a few hours of restless sleep before the morning news jolted her awake. Everywhere, people were buzzing about what had happened. Some praised the authorities' crackdown, claiming that these powers were too dangerous to remain unchecked. Others insisted that the city had to learn to coexist with its newly awakened population, to research and train them responsibly, rather than criminalize them. More extremist voices argued that the meteorite should be destroyed entirely, to end the threat once and for all. But the scientists insisted that any reckless destruction could trigger an explosion of unknown magnitude, possibly far greater than the meteor's initial impact. The cosmic crystal was laced with energies no one fully understood. Hearing all of this, Marisol realized she couldn't stay silent. If she hid in her apartment, eventually the city's fear might spiral toward violence again. Perhaps, if cooler heads prevailed, they could figure out how to integrate new abilities into everyday life. She was no expert on negotiations, but she did know empathy, reason, and the city's old sense of community. Thinking of the child she had saved, she dared to believe that the new generation of gifted individuals could offer more help than harm to the city. That morning, she gathered what courage she could muster and went to attend a newly scheduled public hearing at City Hall. Officials sat at a long table, with lines of worried citizens packing the room. Scientists hunched over laptops, their equipment beeping softly. Representatives from several grassroots organizations waited for a chance to speak. A few gifted individuals, including Yvonne and Darnell, had been invited to share their experiences. Marisol, sweaty palms wrapped around her notebook, stepped up when it was her turn. She explained how she'd discovered her cryokinetic power. She admitted she felt terrified, but also recognized the potential good these powers could do, like saving a child from a flood or quelling fires or stabilizing damaged structures with earthen reinforcements. The city manager listened with a frown, tapping his finger on a stack of proposals. After the hearing, Marisol found herself cornered outside by a small group of local politicians, scientists, and community leaders. They peppered her with questions. What triggered her powers the most? How reliably could she evoke them? Could she demonstrate creating ice on command? With a nod, she spread her hands, though nervousness made her tremble. She pictured a delicate shape, a snowflake in midair. A swirl of cold air danced around her palms, coalescing into a single shimmering flake that drifted downward before vanishing into vapor. A city council member raised an eyebrow, speechless. A scientist, practically salivating for data, asked if they might run a few tests. Marisol hesitated, then agreed, because part of her believed that responsible research could be the key to controlling these gifts, without letting them turn destructive. Over the next week, a tenuous peace settled over the city. The National Guard maintained a perimeter around the meteorite, but attempts to forcibly dampen the powers of every new gifted individual became less frequent. Instead, official training programs began popping up, ad hoc classes taught by scientists and volunteer experts who'd had more time to practice their gifts. Marisol joined a small group dedicated to refining cryokinesis and water manipulation, working alongside a paramedic named Karen, who had discovered an affinity for healing with water-based powers. Together, the group honed their abilities by controlling temperature, forming ice shapes, or conjuring water without letting it run wild. Meanwhile, other support circles formed for fire users needing discipline to avoid spontaneous blazes, air users learning to redirect gusts away from the city's foundational structures, and so on. Gradually, the city's daily life resumed. Commuters returned to their routines, albeit carefully, mindful that someone on the bus might accidentally cause a thunderous gust if they sneezed. Restaurants reopened with disclaimers posted on their walls requesting that elemental powers be kept under polite restraint. School boards deliberated about introducing gifted guidelines into the curriculum, like earthquake drills, but for a variety of new hazards and possibilities. The local news reported on volunteers with earth-based gifts helping fix road damage, or on city landscaping crews who now shaped elaborate topiaries with metal manipulations. The transformation wasn't always smooth. Accidents still happened, and not everyone accepted the new normal. But the sense of utter panic slowly receded. Marisol's life took on a new hue. She was still the dependable daughter who helped her mum after work and kept an eye on young Mateo's homework. She still studied diligently, albeit with frequent breaks to practice channeling her cryokinetic energy. Friends from the university, once mere classmates, became training partners. They compared notes on weird side effects. Aria, who could shape air currents, often complained of headaches whenever storms brewed off the coast. Gabe, who could manipulate small amounts of metal, found that his phone occasionally malfunctioned in his presence. Real-world consequences of magic, they joked. As spring rolled into summer, the city had inched closer to acceptance. There was talk of building a research station around the meteorite, one that would stand as a beacon of knowledge and cooperation rather than a site of fear. Security would remain, ensuring the meteorite was neither exploited nor destroyed. Efforts to close the site entirely failed after public outcry. Residents insisted on learning about this cosmic gift that had literally crash-landed into their lives. Even those who never manifested a single spark of elemental power still felt changed. It was as if the meteorite's cosmic light had peeled back the mundane surface of the city, revealing a new layer of wonder and risk. One late afternoon, Marisol found herself standing at the chain-link fence around the meteorite again, this time with a handful of city officials and the research team. She could see the purple-blue glow pulsating faintly, still mesmerizing. "You can feel it, can't you?" a scientist murmured beside her. "That ripple, like there's something alive in the crystal." Marisol nodded. Indeed, she sensed a gentle current vibrating in her chest. All around them, city workers and volunteers were laying out fresh fencing and reinforced barriers for safety. But the mood was hopeful rather than hostile. Younger kids peered through the fence, eyes bright with curiosity, while older residents approached with caution seasoned by the city's recent turbulence. Spurred by a friend's encouraging nudge, Marisol formed a small ice sculpture, a graceful swirl like a wave crest on the ground before the fence. As the crystal meteorite reflected the sculpture in a shimmering light, some in the crowd gasped softly with wonder. A handful even applauded. It was a far cry from the chaos of before. In that moment, against the backdrop of living cosmic fragments, Marisol felt a sharp sense of gratitude. She and others in the city had been thrown into a crucible of transformation. Some had come out kinder and wiser. Some still harbored resentment or fear. But it was undeniably a new chapter in the city's story. Perhaps in time, when they fully understood the meteorite's mysteries, they would look back on this upheaval as the spark that ignited a renaissance. After all, the meteor's magic didn't have to be a curse. It could become a driving force for discovery, resilience, and unity. So, Marisol stood at the edge of the crater, letting the last rays of sun glimmer off the cosmic crystal. She felt the dormant power within her begin to stir, but it no longer frightened her the way it once had. It felt like part of who she was, a silent promise that even in times of upheaval, new strengths could arise. At her side, the fence rattled with a passing breeze, and the hush of the evening fell over the crater. It was now a place of heartfelt potential, a monument to how drastically magic could restructure a city, from its buildings to its people's very soul. And while the future remained uncertain, Marisol couldn't help but smile, hopeful that they would learn to wield this meteor magic with courage and compassion for whatever challenges lay ahead.